Welcome back to Occult Archives.
The show that delves into the mysteries and myths surrounding some of history's most feared books.
From mystical grimoires to ancient religious texts, we examine these controversial works and try to understand the secrets that they hold.
I'm excited for this one. Today we'll be exploring knowledge of the higher worlds, a journey through inner awakening.
So have you ever, felt that there might be something more to reality than what we can see and touch?
Yeah.
That perhaps us humans have kind of a, hidden potential for experiencing other worlds.
I think a lot of people have that feeling.
I know I have.
Well,
And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Our guide for this journey is Rudolf Steiner.
that's right. Steiner's book, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and Its Attainment, was actually recommended to us by you, the listener, for a deep dive.
So what does Steiner say about this hidden potential?
Well, he suggests that we can actually develop what he calls supersensible perception,
Okay.
which is essentially the ability to gain insights into realms that are beyond our five senses.
So is he saying that everyone has this ability?
Yeah. He believes that this isn't some special ability reserved for a select few, but rather a potential within each and every one of us.
It's like we have these, senses that are just kind of like sleeping or something,
Exact.
and we need to wake them up.
Yeah, he calls them slumbering faculties.
I like that, slumbering faculties.
Hey.
What exactly are these faculties?
Well, he's talking about the ability to perceive what he calls the soul and spirit worlds.
Okay.
And Steiner maintains that these aren't just abstract concepts, they're actual realms of existence just as real as the physical world.
Whoa. Okay, so there are other worlds out there, but how do we get there?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Steiner refers to a tradition of occult or esoteric training.
Occult? That's a kind of a loaded word, right?
Sure, yeah. A lot of people associate it with secrecy or forbidden knowledge.
Right. Like it's only for a select few.
Well, Steiner actually addresses that head on. He says that this knowledge is no more secret than learning to read or write.
Okay, so anyone can do it.
Right. It's not about being part of some elite group. It's about learning a method and putting in the work.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like writing isn't some secret art. You go to school, you learn your ABCs, and well, you learn to write.
Exactly. The same principle applies to developing these higher faculties.
So it's less about being chosen or something and more about just dedication and effort.
Precisely. He even suggests that if you're genuinely dedicated to pursuing this path, then initiation will, in a way, find you.
Interesting. So it's like the knowledge reveals itself to those who are ready.
Yeah.
But let's say someone is ready. Where do they even begin?
Steiner emphasizes inner development as the foundation. Things like cultivating veneration and devotion.
Those sound like pretty abstract qualities.
Yeah.
How do they actually help us develop these abilities?
Steiner says that having a reverent attitude kind of creates this sympathetic resonance in our soul,
Okay.
and it allows us to connect with subtle qualities in the world around us.
Qualities that we normally wouldn't be able to perceive.
Exact.
So it's like we're tuning our inner senses to a different frequency.
Exactly. But it's not just about having the right attitude. It's also about developing a rich inner life.
Okay. What does that mean?
Well, Steiner argues that we need to step back from the constant distractions of modern life and really nurture our inner world.
Okay. So spending less time on our phones and more time, in nature or something.
Yeah, something like that. It's about creating the inner space necessary to connect with the deeper splendor of the world.
That's actually really beautiful.
Steiner was a very depth thinker, and he believed that pursuing knowledge purely for personal gain or to inflate the ego was actually a hindrance on this path.
That makes sense. You can't be doing this just to show off or something.
Right.
It has to be about something more.
Exactly. True advancement comes from a selfless desire for knowledge. It's about human growth and cosmic evolution. He even goes so far as to say that every idea should strive to become an ideal.
Okay, I like that. But enough about ideas. Let's get practical.
Sure.
What are some of the actual steps that Steiner recommends?
One of the first practical rules that he outlines is the importance of creating moments of inner tranquility.
Inner tranquility.
Yeah, taking some time each day to just be still and quiet.
But be present.
Exactly. And in those moments, you should practice distinguishing between the essential and the non-essential.
The essential and the non-essential. Okay, I can see how that would be helpful for just life in general.
Right, but it's also crucial for understanding the symbolic language of spiritual science.
Okay, because he mentions that the original teachings were often expressed in this symbolic language.
Yeah, but Steiner says that the deeper meaning of these symbols isn't something you figure out intellectually.
Okay.
It unfolds naturally as you progress on the path.
So the meaning reveals itself.
Exactly.
So let's say I'm sitting there in my inner tranquility. What am I supposed to be thinking about?
Steiner says you should detach from your personal situation, your everyday worries, and try to contemplate things from a purely human perspective.
Okay. So not my problems, but like the problems of humanity.
Right. Issues that would resonate with any human being regardless of their personal circumstances.
And what's the goal of this?
Well, it helps you connect with something larger than yourself. You start to sense that you belong to a higher world.
Okay. So it's like shifting our focus from the small self to the big self.
Precisely. And as you cultivate this inner focus, Steiner says, you start to hear voices within.
Voices within.
Yeah, it's like you're opening up a channel of communication with the spiritual world.
And what do these voices say?
They offer insights, guidance.
Okay.
It's the beginning of what Steiner calls intercourse with the spiritual world.
That sounds intense.
It can be, but it also brings a deep sense of peace and joy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happens next?
Well, after those initial steps, Steiner outlines a stage called preparation.
Preparation for what?
Preparation for the more formal aspects of esoteric training.
Oh, okay. So this is where things get serious.
You could say that. This stage involves a very conscious and disciplined cultivation of our thoughts and feelings.
Okay, so like thought control.
Sort of, but it's not about suppression.
Right.
It's about directing our attention to specific things.
Like what?
Well, Steiner recommends focusing on the contrasting processes of growth and decay in nature.
Okay, so like watching a flower bloom and then wilt.
Exactly. But you have to really focus your attention, exclude all other distractions, and fully immerse yourself in the experience.
Okay, but why growth and decay specifically?
Because by doing that, Steiner says you start to notice certain feelings arising within you that you may not have been aware of before.
Okay.
And those feelings, if you cultivate them, can lead to some pretty significant spiritual developments.
Like what?
Well, you start to perceive what Steiner calls the soul world or astral plane.
The astral plane.
Yeah, and growth and decay are no longer just things you observe externally. They manifest as spiritual lines and figures.
Wait, so I'm actually seeing things.
Yeah, but not with your physical eyes. It's more like an inner vision.
That's wild.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, after preparation, there's a stage that Steiner calls enlightenment.
Enlightenment. So we're talking like Buddha level enlightenment here.
Well, it's a type of enlightenment. It comes from developing certain slumbering feelings and thoughts
Okay, and how do we develop those?
through patient and continuous practice.
Give me an example.
Steiner describes an exercise where you observe a stone, a plant, and an animal with very focused attention.
Okay, what am I looking for?
Well, you should be thinking specific thoughts about the form of each object, how it moves or doesn't move, and the forces that drive it.
Okay.
And through this contemplation, you start to develop distinct feelings associated with each object.
I see. And these feelings lead to enlightenment.
Well, they lead to the development of clairvoyance. You start to perceive what Steiner calls soul and spirit colors.
So these are colors that you see with your spiritual eyes.
Exactly.
And what colors are we talking about?
Well, Steiner describes the stone as emanating blue or blue-red, the animal red or red-yellow, and the plant green, which then transforms into a light ethereal pink.
That's so cool. So we're actually seeing things in a completely different way.
Exactly.
It's like a whole new dimension of reality opens up.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, Steiner also talks about the control of thoughts and feelings. Why is that so important?
Because as you develop these higher faculties, you become more aware of the power of your thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
A negative or destructive thought can actually have a tangible impact in the higher worlds.
So it's like our thoughts are actually things.
Exactly.
They have real power.
And that's why it's so important to guard our thoughts and feelings.
Steiner also talks about the importance of courage.
Yes, courage and fearlessness are absolutely essential for the initiate.
Why is that?
Because as you progress on this path, you're going to encounter things that might seem strange or even frightening.
Okay.
You're going to be stepping outside of your comfort zone, outside of the familiar.
And that takes courage.
Exactly. Steiner encourages us to actively seek out opportunities to develop courage in our daily lives.
And what about the trials of initiation? What are those all about?
Well, Steiner explains that there are certain obstacles that we need to overcome in order to progress on this path.
Okay.
These trials are like tests that challenge us to apply the knowledge and skills we've developed.
What kind of trials?
Well, he describes 3 main trials: the fire trial, the water trial, and the air trial.
Okay, let's start with the fire trial. What's that all about?
It involves obtaining a truer vision of things.
A truer vision.
Yeah, like seeing beyond the superficial appearance of things and perceiving their true spiritual essence.
So it's like seeing the world with new eyes.
Exactly.
And how do we prepare for that?
Steiner says that experiences in our ordinary lives, like facing challenges and overcoming difficulties, can actually prepare us for this trial.
Okay. So like life is a school in itself.
Precisely.
What about the water trial?
This trial is about developing self-control and the ability to navigate the higher worlds without external guidance.
Okay. So it's like we're learning to swim on our own.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And what about the air trial?
The air trial is all about finding your inner strength and direction when there's no clear goal or external pressure.
So it's like being in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight.
Exactly.
You have to find your own way.
And trust your inner compass.
Okay, so we've gone through the trials. What happens next?
Well, Steiner says that after successfully completing the trials, the student is allowed to enter the temple of higher wisdom.
The temple of higher wisdom.
Yeah, and there they receive 2 drafts.
Drafts. Like drinks?
Yeah, it's a symbolic representation.
Okay.
The first draft is called the draft of forgetfulness.
Forgetfulness.
Yeah, it essentially purges the soul of anything that might hinder selfless service to higher truth.
Okay.
And the second draft is the draft of remembrance.
Remembrance.
And this one grants the ability to retain knowledge of higher truths. It's like the knowledge becomes a part of you.
So it's not just something you memorize.
No, it becomes an intrinsic part of your being.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Now, Steiner also talks about the practical aspects of this training.
Yes. He says that through consistent practice, our soul and spirit actually begin to transform.
How so?
Well, he describes it as developing a kind of organic symmetry.
Okay.
Before training, our soul and spirit might seem like undifferentiated masses.
Okay.
But through the exercises and the inner work, they start to take on brilliant colors and regular structure.
It's like we're building a spiritual body.
That's a good way to think about it.
So how do we do this in practice?
Steiner says that during those moments of inner tranquility, we should still all our habitual thoughts and patiently wait for the higher worlds to begin shaping our spiritual organs.
Okay, so patience is key.
Absolutely. And he also emphasizes the importance of finding the right environment for this inner work.
Like being in nature.
Yeah, being in nature can be very helpful.
But what if you live in a city?
Even then, you can create a peaceful and harmonious environment in your own home.
And what about the conditions of esoteric training that Steiner talks about?
Those are essential.
What are they?
There are 5 main conditions.
Go ahead.
The esteem for truth, the feeling of responsibility, the ability to shape one's life according to the inner life, the conviction that the real being of man lies in his interior, and steadfastness in carrying out a resolution.
Those are some pretty significant conditions.
They are, but Steiner emphasizes that they're not arbitrary rules.
Okay.
They arise naturally from the very pursuit of higher knowledge.
So it's like if you want to play the game, you have to follow the rules.
Exactly.
Steiner also talks about the results of initiation and how it affects the soul.
Yes, he describes how certain functions of the soul become regulated through esoteric training.
Like what?
Well, things like the cultivation of ideas, the control of resolutions, speech, outward action, management of life, human endeavor, and learning from life.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
It is. It really touches on all aspects of our being.
And he also mentions the development of lotus flowers within the soul.
Yeah, those are symbolic representations of our developing spiritual sense organs.
Okay.
And each lotus flower corresponds to a specific quality or ability.
Like what?
Well, there's the 16-petaled lotus, which represents truthfulness and benevolence.
Okay.
The 12-petaled lotus, which represents control of thought.
Okay.
The 10-petaled lotus, which represents the ability to regulate sensory impressions.
Okay.
The 8-petaled lotus, which represents inner composure and self-mastery.
Okay.
And the 6-petaled lotus, which represents complete mastery of the personality.
Wow, that's a lot of lotus flowers.
And they all develop through consistent practice and inner work.
Now let's talk about the path of training. What are some of the key things that Steiner highlights there?
Well, he explains that this training is all about developing our spiritual organs in a balanced and harmonious way.
Yeah.
It involves specific exercises in meditation and concentration.
Okay.
And he also talks about the importance of understanding the concept of man as a microcosm.
Man is a microcosm.
Yeah, which means that the human being is like a miniature version of the universe.
Okay.
And Our inner life actually manifests outwardly in the spiritual world.
So what we do here affects the spiritual realm.
Exactly.
And then there's the concept of direct knowledge of the higher self.
Yes, that's a key milestone on the path.
What happens there?
The student gains a direct experiential understanding of their own higher self.
Okay.
They see its connection to spiritual beings and its origin in a higher world.
Wow, that must be an incredible experience.
It is.
And what about growing into the higher self?
That's the next step.
Okay.
Once you've gained knowledge of your higher self, you have to start living from that perspective.
So it's not just about knowing, it's about being. And Steiner also talks about building a spiritual home.
Yes, he says that we need to create a kind of spiritual dwelling place for ourselves in the higher worlds.
Okay.
It's like a base of operations for our spiritual work.
I like that. A spiritual home. Now, what about continuity of consciousness? Steiner has some pretty interesting things to say about sleep.
Yeah, he explains that through training, our dream life actually starts to transform.
Okay.
Dreams become less chaotic and more meaningful.
And he also talks about dreamless sleep.
Yes, he says that even in dreamless sleep, our soul is still active in a purely spiritual realm.
So we're never truly unconscious.
Not according to Steiner.
That's pretty mind-blowing. And then there's the splitting of the human personality during spiritual training. What's that all about?
Well, Steiner explains that during sleep, our soul actually separates from our physical body.
Okay.
And through training, we can become consciously aware of this separation.
Wow, so it's like an out-of-body experience.
In a way, yes.
Now let's talk about the guardian of the threshold.
Yes, the guardian. That's a significant encounter.
What's it all about?
Well, Steiner describes meeting the guardian as a pivotal experience on the path.
And there are two guardians.
Yeah, the lesser guardian and the greater guardian.
Okay, so what happens when you meet the lesser guardian?
It's often described as a pretty intense experience.
Okay.
The guardian basically tells you that you're now responsible for your own destiny.
Okay.
You're no longer under the same karmic influences as before.
And what about the greater guardian?
That's a more profound encounter.
Okay.
It's about understanding the true nature of life and death.
So it's like a life review.
Sort of. It's about seeing the bigger picture.
And what's the role of these guardians?
They act as gatekeepers, making sure that only those who are ready can enter the higher realms.
So it's like a test.
You could say that. It's a test of our character and our commitment to selfless service.
This has been an incredible deep dive into Rudolf Steiner's knowledge of the higher worlds.
It's a dense book, but it's packed with so much wisdom.
So for our listeners who are just starting to explore these ideas, what are some key takeaways?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that we all have the potential for higher knowledge and spiritual growth.
Okay.
It's not something that's reserved for a select few.
And that's a really empowering message.
It is. And I think another important takeaway is that this is an inner journey.
Okay.
It's about developing our inner faculties and aligning ourselves with higher principles.
So it's not about like going to a special place or finding a secret teacher.
No, it's about the work that we do on ourselves.
I love that. So to our listeners, what slumbering faculties do you sense within yourself?
What potential are you ready to awaken?
This is a journey that we can all take, and the rewards are immeasurable. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into knowledge of the higher worlds.
Until next time.
Keep seeking.